Enlightening episode of The Truth About the Plant, the show that takes you on a journey through the world of psychoactive plants and alternative wellness, all while delivering those real, actionable insights you crave. I'm your host, Christina Dees. This is my equally talented, amazing co-host, Dr. Amanda Ryman. Messed up your name. Dr. Ryman, why don't you just tell them why we're here?
I will tell them why we're here. So we're here because it can be really hard to find accurate information about cannabis on the internet. You might search for something, you get 100 different responses, and many of those responses are going to contradict each other, meaning you can spend countless hours trying to find out the truth. Well, we cut through all of that and we give you actionable insights, realistic, science-backed information on your most pressing cannabis questions in 15 minutes or less. So you can get the info you need and go about your day. You can think of us as your really cool aunties or your kick-ass granddaughters here to tell you the truth.
Yeah, and we're fun to hang out with. So let's welcome all you green detectives and curious comrades. Get ready for a journey into the mystical realm of THC time travel. Today's burning question is the undisputed champion of cannabis inquiries. How long does marijuana stay in your system? So get your Sherlock hats on because we're about to crack the case of the disappearing high. All right, Dr. Ryman, while cannabis is being used more and more by adults post-legalization, we still have a lot to figure out. One of the things is how we deal with drug testing. Unfortunately, that still happens. So, Amanda, tell us a little bit about what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, it's a bit of a conundrum. So prior to legalization, testing for cannabis happened before you were able to get a job, for people on probation or parole, people driving erratically, and for people in treatment for substance abuse. And this was very, very common. And even though cannabis is legal in many states, it's still illegal at the federal level. And that means that the drug testing patchwork is still in existence. And it still really depends on the state you live in, the job you have, who you are, depending whether or not you're going to be subject to a drug test. At the end of the day, cannabis is still federally illegal, and using it can put you at risk of being drug tested in a lot of situations, including the ones mentioned above.
So even in legal states, companies can test employees for cannabis?
They absolutely can. Now, fortunately, a lot of companies have stopped doing this practice. The main reason being that they realize that by excluding cannabis consumers from their workforce, they're actually missing out on some very talented, motivated, really good workers, and they don't want to do that. So we're seeing cannabis testing as a pre-employment condition happening less and less. But it definitely still happens, especially for large corporations that may have offices all over the country.
Yeah, I think Amazon is one of those companies. I can't even talk today. As one of those companies that wants those quality workforce, talented people, and stop doing testing. Okay, so we got pre-employment testing. Say that again.
Same with NASA. NASA also stopped pre-employment testing for cannabis because they realized that they were passing over a lot of really qualified people.
Interesting. Yeah. All right. So pre-employment testing for marijuana might be changing, but it sounds like it's coming up positive for marijuana during a drug test could still have negative consequences for the consumer. Is that right?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. So in many ways, the legalization of cannabis has preceded the acceptance of certain groups and people in certain circumstances using cannabis. So people that have jobs where they operate heavy machinery, people who are on probation or parole, people who are in substance abuse treatment, people vying for custody of their children, fit into this example. So even though the use of cannabis may not impair you on the job, it may not have anything to do with your work, it may not have anything to do with your qualities as a person, there's still assumptions about who should and should not be using cannabis. So the bottom line is, even if it's legal, you can still be subject to a drug test, and testing positive for cannabis can still negatively influence your life.
For people out there who are using cannabis and may be drug tested, what do they need to know?
Well, the most important thing to know is that cannabis can stay in your system long after the effects have passed, right? So for people who use cannabis regularly, they can test positive for weeks after their last use. For people who only use it occasionally, they'll likely test negative after just a few days to a week. And this has to do with how cannabis is stored in the body, how THC is stored in the fat. So you may have had a joint over the weekend. You come into work on Monday. You're not high anymore by any means, but if you're drug tested that day, you still could come up positive.
Okay, but we're just talking about THC, right?
So technically, the tests are just looking for THC metabolites. However, because of some lack of regulations around CBD products, there are some CBD products out there that may have trace amounts of THC, which means even if you're using a CBD product and you don't think there's any THC in it, there may be enough to show up on a drug test. So if you know you're going to be drug tested, we suggest to avoid CBD products as well until the test has passed, just to be sure.
Okay, I know what everybody out there is thinking. Is there anything that people can do to speed up the elimination of THC in their bodies?
So, unfortunately, not really. I mean, you can drink a lot of water. There's definitely some detox products on the market, but the only way to ensure that THC is out of your system before a test is time, right? So, you want to make sure enough time has passed in order for your body to work that THC out of the fat. Now, you can purchase drug tests at a drugstore. So, if you know you're going to be drug tested, a lot of times I suggest just test yourself prior, just so you know going in. You might be able to delay the test, but at least you're going to have a sense of whether or not you're going to test positive.
Well, we recently did an episode on cannabis and driving. How does testing apply?
So, as I just mentioned, and as we mentioned in that other video, THC stays in your system after intoxication is over. So, you could get pulled over. Let's say you run through a stop sign or you make a turn without a signal and it's the end of the month and the cops are trying to get their ticket money. You could have used cannabis a week before and you could still come up positive. So there is work being done to develop better ways of testing for cannabis intoxication on the road, but they're still in early phases. So if you're somebody who thinks, hey, I might have cannabis on board, and if you're a medical cannabis patient and you use cannabis regularly, there's a good chance you always have a little bit of cannabis on board. It's really important to obey those traffic rules.
So, bottom line, THC can stay in your system for a period of time after you consume. And for regular consumers, like everyday users, this can last a few weeks. So, even though cannabis is legal, people can still get fired for testing positive. Is this right?
That is correct. Now, some states like California are looking to pass legislation, or California did pass legislation that does give some worker protections for people who use medical cannabis. But for people that don't have a medical card out there that are using legally in adult use states, really take care, especially if you think you might be in a situation where you're going to be drug tested.
Well, fellow green explorers, it's time to roll up this herbaceous adventure. But before we bid adieu, remember your thoughts are like the secret sauce to our botanical burger. So sauce us up with your green musings at info@mypersonalplants.com. And if you're hungry for more plant-powered wisdom, and who isn't, feast your eyes on our YouTube buffet. Don't just graze, hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell so you can stay in the loop. Until next time, stay lifted, stay green, and keep those questions growing like weeds.